Part 1. The Empire of Silence and the Firing That Sealed a Fate. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to those who sit at the very top of the world. It is not the absence of sound. It is the silence of never being interrupted. The silence where, when you stop speaking, the entire room holds its breath, waiting for your next syllable. The silence of a man who has spent 40 years making sure that no one speaks before he does, and no one dares to speak after he's finished. Arthur Vance, 68 years old, had lived in that exact kind of silence for 4 decades. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Vance Capital, a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring struggling companies, stripping them for parts, and discarding whatever remained. In the financial district of Manhattan, his name carried weight. It was whispered in boardrooms and shouted on trading floors. A signature from Arthur Vance could move $500 million before his morning coffee went cold. His penthouse sat on the 82nd floor of a residential tower on Billionaire's Row. That stretch of impossibly tall, impossibly thin skyscrapers that cluster around the southern end of Central Park like needles piercing the sky. From his living room windows, Arthur could look down on 8 million people going about their lives, their commutes, their arguments, their small victories and quiet defeats, and feel absolutely nothing for any of them. He had not purchased the penthouse for the view, though the view was spectacular. He had purchased it for the isolation. At this altitude, the sirens could not reach him. The chaos of the streets below was reduced to a silent film playing for his private entertainment. The apartment itself was a monument to minimalism and wealth. 4,000 square feet of polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that cost more than most people earned in a decade. There were no family photographs on the walls, no children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, no evidence that anyone actually lived here, rather than simply existed within it. The only personal touches were the abstract paintings, Rothko, Diebenkorn, Twombly, that hung in precise arrangements, each one worth 7 figures, each one chosen not for beauty but for investment potential. Arthur moved through this space like a ghost haunting his own life. He woke at 5 every morning. He drank black coffee at exactly 149 degrees Fahrenheit. He read the Wall Street Journal cover to cover while standing at his kitchen island, never sitting down because sitting was for people who had time to waste. By 6:30, he was on the phone with Tokyo. By 7, London. By 8, his executive team was assembled in his home office, ready to receive their marching orders for the day. He was not a cruel man, not in the way that cruelty is usually understood. He did not take pleasure in others' suffering. He simply did not register it. Emotion, in Arthur's worldview, was an irrational tax that weak people paid for their indecision. Feelings clouded judgment. Attachment created vulnerability. Love was a liability on the balance sheet of life. He had built his empire on this philosophy, and the empire had rewarded him handsomely. 3 children, Trent, Ashley, Derek, educated at schools that cost more per year than the median American household earned. They had been raised by nannies and sent to boarding schools at age 13, taught to read financial statements before they learned to ride bicycles, taught that a Vance does not marry for love but for strategic advantage. They had learned these lessons too well. When they looked at their father now, in their 30s and 40s, they did not see a parent. They saw a majority shareholder, an obstacle, an unopened will. Arthur knew this. He accepted it as the cost of greatness. Kings do not have families, they have successors, and successors, by definition, are always waiting for the king to die. Before we go further into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever known someone who had everything the world says matters, money, power, status, but seemed to have nothing that actually counted? If stories about the true cost of ambition and the unexpected paths to redemption resonate with you, consider subscribing to this channel. We explore narratives that remind us what remains when the money and power fade away. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring more stories like this one to you. But even an empire, no matter how much steel and glass it is built from, requires someone to maintain the machinery. Someone to keep the gears turning smoothly, invisibly, without complaint. In the perfect system that was Arthur Vance's life, that person was Elena Vargas. Elena had come to the penthouse 5 years ago, referred by a staffing agency that specialized in placing domestic workers with ultra-high net worth individuals. She was 36 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. Her face held the particular stillness of a woman who had learned to weather storms entirely on her own, who had discovered that showing emotion was a luxury she could not afford. She did not talk much. She moved through the sprawling apartment like an underground river, present, essential, invisible. She knew that Arthur's blood pressure medication needed to be arranged on the silver tray in a specific order, left to right so he could take them without thinking. She knew that he hated the smell of lilies because they reminded him of his first wife's funeral, and so she never brought flowers into the apartment. She knew that he worked until 2 in the morning on most nights, and so she always left a thermos of chamomile tea on his desk before she left for the evening. She kept Arthur's world spinning smoothly, and in return, he paid her a salary that was generous by any reasonable standard, $85,000 a year, plus a year-end bonus that could cover rent for several months. It was more than she had ever earned before. It was enough to survive. Barely, because Elena had a complication, a variable that did not fit neatly into the contract. His name was Leo, 5 years old. Leo was Elena's son, born 11 weeks premature after a pregnancy complicated by preeclampsia and gestational diabetes. He had spent his first 3 months in the neonatal intensive care unit at New York Presbyterian, fighting for every breath, every ounce, every day. The medical bills from those 3 months had been catastrophic, $250,000 that insurance covered only partially, leaving Elena with debt that would follow her for years, perhaps decades. Leo survived, but he did not emerge unscathed. His lungs were weak, prone to infections that sent him to the emergency room 2 or 3 times each winter. He needed specialized medications, inhaled corticosteroids, bronchodilators, antibiotics for the recurrent pneumonias. That cost hundreds of dollars each month even with insurance. He needed regular appointments with a pediatric pulmonologist, whose copays were $50 a visit. He needed a nebulizer machine, oxygen tanks for emergencies, a pulse oximeter to monitor his blood oxygen levels at night. Elena worked 60-hour weeks to pay for all of it. She picked up extra shifts when she could. She budgeted down to the penny, clipping coupons, shopping at discount stores, never eating out, never buying anything she did not absolutely need. She had learned to make do, to stretch, to sacrifice. It was the only way. On days when Leo's daycare closed, because of illness or weather or staff shortages, Elena had nowhere to leave him. She could not afford to take a day off work. The math simply did not allow it. A day without pay meant choosing between Leo's medication and the electric bill. It meant falling further behind on the debt that already crushed her. So she brought Leo to the penthouse. She would arrive early before Arthur emerged from his bedroom and settle Leo in the utility room, a small space near the service elevator where cleaning supplies and extra linens were stored. She had brought a small mat, a few quiet toys, an old iPad loaded with educational games and cartoons. She would kneel down to Leo's eye level, smooth his dark curls, and whisper the same instructions she gave him every time. "Stay right here, mi amor. Don't come out. Don't make a sound. Mommy will check on you when she can, and we'll go home together this evening. Be brave for me, okay?" And Leo, wise beyond his 5 years in the way that children who grow up too fast always are, would nod solemnly and promise to be good. He would sit cross-legged on his mat, the iPad propped against a stack of towels, and lose himself in cartoons about talking animals and adventures in faraway lands. He was a quiet child by nature, thoughtful, observant, given to long silences, where he seemed to be processing the world around him with an intensity that sometimes unsettled adults. Arthur knew about Leo. Of course he knew. The penthouse had security cameras in every room except the bedrooms and bathrooms. Staff access logs tracked who entered and exited, at what times, using which credentials. Arthur reviewed these reports weekly, not out of paranoia but out of habit. He was a man who believed in knowing everything that happened in his domain. But Arthur had chosen to look the other way, not out of compassion. Arthur Vance did not do compassion, he did it out of calculation. Elena was exceptional at her job, efficient, discreet, anticipating needs before Arthur even recognized them himself. She never asked for raises, never complained about the long hours, never took sick days. And the presence of her child made her work with a desperation that bordered on fanaticism. She was terrified of losing this job, and that terror made her perfect. In the ruthless arithmetic of Arthur's worldview, desperation was leverage. He let the arrangement continue the way a gardener might allow a weed to grow in a hidden corner. As long as it did not threaten the prized roses, it was not worth the effort to remove. This arrangement continued for 3 years without incident. Leo grew from a fragile toddler into a sturdy 5-year-old, still prone to respiratory infections but stronger, healthier, more resilient. Elena maintained her invisible presence in the penthouse, moving through Arthur's life, like a shadow, essential and unacknowledged, until one Tuesday morning in November. Stories like this one don't just entertain, they remind us of truths we sometimes forget. That success without connection is just a gilded cage, that the people we dismiss might be the ones who matter most. If you're finding value in this narrative, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. We release new stories every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Plus, your subscription directly supports our ability to keep creating content that makes you think and feel deeply. That morning, Arthur's chief compliance officer sent him an internal memo, a routine audit report on private properties used for business purposes. The memo was flagged as urgent, printed on the firm's letterhead, with certain passages highlighted in yellow. The key paragraph was bolded and underlined. Review of security footage at the penthouse residence has revealed the frequent unregistered presence of a minor child, approximately 5 years old, during work hours. This individual is not listed on any visitor logs, has not undergone required background checks, and is not covered by the corporation's liability insurance policy. The presence of an uninsured minor in a private workspace constitutes a severe violation of Clause 4B of our corporate liability insurance agreement. In the event of an accident, slip and fall, allergic reaction, any incident resulting in injury, the litigation risk is substantial. Insurance carriers could deny coverage entirely. Recommendation: eliminate this liability exposure immediately through termination of responsible personnel or permanent removal of the unauthorized individual from the premises. Arthur sat in his Italian leather desk chair, reading the memo twice. He looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, at the Empire State Building piercing the clouds in the distance. He felt nothing, no anger, no sympathy, no regret. Just a mild irritation that a system he had allowed to function imperfectly had now been flagged as a problem requiring solution. It was not personal. It was never personal with Arthur. It was simply risk management. Due diligence, the kind of cold calculation that had made him successful. He picked up his Mont Blanc pen, the same pen he had used to sign billion-dollar mergers, and initialed the memo in the margin. Then he forwarded it to his head of human resources with a brief text. Handle per standard protocol. Compensate strictly by the book. Terminate contract before noon today. Ensure zero media exposure. He did not fire Elena himself. Kings do not execute the help with their own hands. They have functionaries for that. People in suits who understand the proper procedures, the legally defensible language, the art of termination without litigation. At 9:30 that morning, while Elena was polishing crystal wine glasses in the kitchen, Arthur's executive assistant Marcus entered the room. Marcus was 28, freshly minted from a top business school, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. He did not look Elena in the eye. He could not. Instead, he placed a thick white envelope on the marble kitchen island, positioning it precisely in the center, as if alignment might somehow make what he was about to say less terrible. "Ms. Vargas," Marcus began, his voice carefully modulated to sound both professional and sympathetic, a tone he had probably practiced in the mirror. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. This letter is formal notification that your employment contract is being terminated, effective immediately. The company has determined that certain arrangements regarding your work environment are no longer compatible with our liability insurance requirements," Marcus continued, the corporate euphemisms flowing smoothly. "However, in recognition of your years of service, Mr. Vance has authorized a severance package of 2 months' salary, in full compliance with New York state labor law. There is also a check for your remaining accrued time off. Building management will assist you with packing your personal belongings. You'll need to vacate the premises by noon. Elena stopped polishing. The cloth remained in her hand, suspended over the wine glass. She looked at the envelope, then at Marcus, her face betraying nothing. Elena was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the envelope, calculating. 2 months' salary, about $14,000 before taxes. Enough to cover rent for 3 months, maybe 4 if she was careful. Enough to buy time to find another job. Not enough to cover Leo's medical expenses for more than a few months. Not enough to pay down the debt. Not enough to change anything fundamental. She could have argued. She could have explained about Leo, about the medical bills, about the fact that her son was just a child who had nowhere else to go. She could have begged, pleaded, appealed to whatever scraps of humanity might exist in Arthur Vance's carefully constructed world. But Elena had lived too long, in too many impossible situations, to believe that begging would change anything. She had learned that when the machine decides to grind you up, crying only makes you pathetic, not persuasive. The decision had been made. The only question was whether she would leave with whatever dignity she could salvage. "I understand," Elena said finally. Her voice was steady, calm in a way that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. She had faced down eviction notices, hospital administrators demanding payment, collection agencies calling at all hours. She had faced worse than this. She picked up the envelope, nodded once at Marcus, and walked to the utility room. Leo looked up from his iPad when she entered, his dark eyes bright. "Are we going home early, Mommy?" he asked. "Yes, mi amor. We're going home early today." She knelt down and began gathering his things. The mat, the toys, the iPad. Her hands were steady, but inside something was breaking. Not her heart. Her heart had collused over long ago. It was something deeper, some fundamental belief that if she worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, played by the rules, eventually things would get easier. That belief was dying now, suffocated by the reality that the rules were written by people who would never understand what it meant to be her. She packed Leo's small backpack, took his hand, and led him to the service elevator. As they waited for the elevator to arrive, Leo looked back toward the apartment. Through the partially open door, he could see Arthur Vance standing in the hallway, holding a cup of coffee, his expression completely neutral. Leo did not understand what was happening. Not really. He was 5 years old. He knew they were leaving early. He knew his mother was sad, though she was trying to hide it. He knew the tall man with the cold eyes had something to do with it, but there was no anger in Leo's gaze, just curiosity. The kind of pure, unfiltered observation that children possess before the world teaches them to judge. He was trying to memorize this man, this place, this moment, trying to understand how the world worked. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Elena guided Leo inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, Leo looked back one more time. Arthur was still standing there, watching them leave. His face was a mask. No regret, no second thoughts. Just the blank expression of a man who had made a business decision and was already moving on to the next item on his agenda. The elevator doors closed with a soft click. Arthur turned and walked back to his office, where he had a conference call with investors in Tokyo, scheduled for 10 o'clock. Elena Vargas and her son had been deleted from his life, wiped from his hard drive like corrupted data. The risk had been eliminated. The system was clean again. He did not know it yet, could not know it. But in that moment, Arthur Vance had signed his own death warrant. Not a physical death, not yet. Something worse. The death of whatever remained of his soul. The weeks after Elena's departure passed in a blur of work for Arthur. There were always deals to close, meetings to attend, crises to manage. He hired a new housekeeper through a different agency, a professional, efficient woman named Patricia, who arrived promptly at 9 each morning and left promptly at 5 each evening. She did exactly what was required of her and nothing more. The apartment was clean. The laundry was done. Meals were prepared according to the specifications Arthur provided. But something was different. The coffee was never quite the right temperature. The blood pressure pills were left in their original bottles rather than arranged on the silver tray. The chamomile tea no longer appeared on his desk at 1 in the morning. When Arthur came home late from the office, the apartment felt emptier somehow, colder, though the thermostat read the same as it always had. Arthur dismissed these feelings as irrelevant sentimentality. He was not a man who indulged in nostalgia or regret. He had made the correct business decision. The liability had been eliminated. End of story. But his body did not adhere to his philosophy. It started with headaches, sharp, stabbing pains at the base of his skull that came without warning and lingered for hours. Arthur took ibuprofen and kept working. Then came the mornings when he would reach for his pen and feel a strange numbness in his right hand, as if it had fallen asleep. He would shake it out, massage his fingers, attribute it to sleeping wrong or typing too much, or the inevitable aches of aging. One Sunday morning in late January, Arthur was reading the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal when the print suddenly blurred. The words swam on the page, rearranging themselves into nonsensical patterns before snapping back into focus. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, told himself he needed to get his prescription checked. His personal physician, Dr. Morrison's, saw him the following week. After a thorough examination and a battery of tests, Dr. Morrison delivered his assessment with the careful diplomacy of a man who had treated wealthy executives for 30 years and knew better than to alarm them unnecessarily. Your blood pressure is elevated, Arthur. Your cholesterol is higher than I'd like to see. You're working too hard, sleeping too little, and your stress levels are through the roof. My recommendation: take a vacation. Go to the Hamptons, play some golf. Disconnect for a week or two. Arthur nodded politely, accepted the prescriptions for blood pressure medication, and returned to his office. He had a hostile takeover in the works, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would define his legacy. There was no time for vacations. Kings do not take breaks. The moment you step away, the wolves circle. By mid-February, Arthur was working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, ignoring the increasingly urgent signals his body was sending him. The headaches grew worse. The numbness in his right hand spread to his arm. Twice he noticed his speech slurring slightly during phone calls, and twice he blamed it on fatigue. He was Arthurless. He did not get sick. Weakness was not an option. We're approaching a pivotal moment in this story, and I want to thank you for being here with us. Narratives like Arthur's force us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we're willing to sacrifice in pursuit of success, and what we might lose along the way. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, stories about redemption, about second chances, about the unexpected ways that grace enters our lives. Your support makes it all possible. February 14th, 6:45 in the morning. Arthur was standing alone in the pantry area, adjacent to his executive office on the 80th floor of the Vance Capitol Tower. He had arrived at 5 a.m. to review final documents for the day's crucial merger vote, scheduled for 8 o'clock. This acquisition, a hostile takeover of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, represented the culmination of 18 months of work. Billions of dollars were at stake. Arthur's reputation, his legacy, his place in the pantheon of Wall Street titans. He did not trust the new assistant to make his coffee correctly, so he had come to the pantry to prepare it himself. The pantry was a small, luxurious space with marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and an espresso machine that cost more than most cars. Arthur measured the grounds with precision, tamped them down, locked the portafilter into place. As he reached for a cup, something changed. It was not dramatic, not at first, just a sudden silence in his mind, as if someone had cut a wire. A strange absence where thought should be. Arthur tried to move his right hand to grab the cup, but the hand did not respond. It hung at his side, limp and useless, as if it belonged to someone else. The espresso cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards in all directions. Arthur tried to step back, but his right leg would not support him. He stumbled, grabbed at the counter with his left hand, but his balance was gone. He fell hard, his right side slamming into the floor, his cheek pressed against the cold marble. He tried to push himself up, but his right arm was dead weight beneath him. He tried to call for help, to shout for his assistant, but his tongue felt thick and uncooperative. The sounds that emerged from his mouth were guttural, unintelligible. Nothing like the commanding voice that had directed billions of dollars and hundreds of employees. Panic flooded through him, pure, animal terror. This was not supposed to happen. He was Arthur Vance. He controlled everything. He did not fall, he did not fail. He lay there on the floor, trapped in his own body, feeling the right side of his face begin to droop, feeling the strength drain from his limbs. Through the partially open door of the pantry, he could see the hallway. If someone walked by, if someone looked in, they would see him, they would help. But it was 6:45 in the morning. The executive floor was empty. His assistant would not arrive until 8. The cleaning crew had finished hours ago. Arthur Vance, who had built an empire on isolation, who had constructed walls of wealth and power to keep the world at bay, was now utterly, completely, catastrophically alone. Minutes passed, or hours, time lost all meaning. Arthur's vision began to blur at the edges. His breathing grew shallow. He could feel consciousness slipping away, feel the darkness closing in those final moments before the blackness took him. Arthur had one clear crystalline thought. I am going to die here, on this floor, and no one will find me until it is far too late. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the open door of the pantry, and beyond it, the empty hallway that stretched into darkness. He did not know it yet, but someone was coming. Someone he had discarded, dismissed, deleted from his life as if she had never mattered. And she would arrive just in time to face an impossible choice. Arthur Vance thought he had eliminated a liability. He thought he had made a clean business decision. He had no idea that the woman he fired would be the only person positioned to save his life, or that someone else would intervene to make sure she couldn't. The next chapter reveals what really happened in those crucial minutes after Arthur collapsed. You'll learn about the 18 minutes that changed everything, the impossible choice that haunted Elena for years, and the shocking betrayal that left Arthur paralyzed not just in body, but in soul. If you're invested in this story, and I hope you are, you won't want to miss part 2. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted the moment it's released. Trust me, the revelations coming in the next chapter will leave you absolutely speechless. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about these characters and their journey. I'll see you in part 2, where we uncover the truth about those 18 minutes and the woman who tried to save a man who had thrown her away.